Nazreen, welcome back. I'm here with Dr. Carpenter. Dr. Carpenter, what part do lobbying organizations play in the formulation of U.S. policy, specifically with regards to Middle East policy and South Asia policy?
You do get lobbies attempting to play significant roles, and in some cases they do have success. With regard to Middle East policy, you have the pro-Israel lobby, which of course is quite influential, but you also have lobbies affiliated with the oil industry, for instance, also having an impact on policy. A smaller but still significant lobby, pro-Saudi, you might say, in terms of trying to maintain a strong relationship with that country, and that goal overlaps with the energy or oil industry lobby. With South Asia, not so much. I mean, you do have concerns expressed by expatriates from various countries who may lobby for or against certain policies that might affect their previous homelands. But you don't have the kind of powerful lobbies that you find with regard to the Middle East or with some other regions. For example, East Asia, you have a very strong lobby in favor of trade issues with China. On the other side, you find a strong lobby in favor of a good relationship between the United States and Taiwan. You don't have a lobbying apparatus to that degree with regard to Central and South Asia.
Okay, but so with regards to the Middle East, do you believe, and many Pakistanis and Muslims across the world believe, that the pro-Israel lobby in this country has influenced American foreign policy in such a way so as to further Israel's strategic interests at the cost of America's own interests?
I think that view oversimplifies matters. There certainly is a strong effort to maintain a very close relationship between the United States and Israel, but you can't understand U.S. policy in the Middle East by focusing simply on the Israeli issue. Energy policy, strategic considerations that were very important during the Cold War have remained important in the post-Cold War period. Those also play important roles in the formulation of U.S. policy in that region, not always leading, to be sure, to wise or prudent policies. But I think it's too easy for many in the Muslim world to simply attribute everything wrong that the United States has done to the Israel lobby.
So I guess my next question would be, if, let's say, the Pakistanis were to organize themselves in such a way as the pro-Israel forces have done so, would America then be more in tune or concerned about Pakistan's own strategic interests?
It's hard to tell what a more vigorous lobbying campaign would do, because so much depends on the specific setting. Which issues are very important at the moment. For instance, the nuclear proliferation issue. That flares from time to time. Obviously, it's very important now with respect to both North Korea and Iran. That also damaged U.S.-Pakistan relations at the time of the revelation of the AQ-Khan network.
Right.
So it's important to look at the total context in which these issues are examined, in which they become prominent or recede in importance.
Lastly, on foreign policy formulation, what part do corporations and financial institutions play in the formulation of U.S. foreign policy in many of these regions of the world? Of course, there's a perception that in Iraq, an oil grab was one of the many motivations, that in Afghanistan there is a motivation to corner Iran and perhaps gain access to resources from Central Asia. Do you think any of this has any merit?
The resource issue may have some merit, but again, I think it greatly oversimplifies matters to assume that that is the only motive or even the most important motive. The U.S. went into Iraq for a number of different reasons, And I would say the oil issue was rather far down on the list. It was an oversimplification of the threat posed by terrorism. It was an obsession with Saddam Hussein, even though one could argue, as many of us did, that Saddam was actually a secular factor containing religious extremism in that part of the world. But American policymakers, once they fixate on a villain, they tend to ignore a lot of nuances that should have been warning policymakers that invading and occupying Iraq would cause far more problems than it would solve. But those who contend that we went into Iraq just to grab the oil resources, I think they really miss a lot of these other issues that were far more important in determining U.S. policy.
So on the whole, do you think that U.S. foreign policy projects America as a force for good on the planet?
Certainly most Americans believe that U.S. foreign policy projects American values in a way that are positive. A lot of other people in the world do not believe that anymore. I think a much smaller percentage believed that at the end of the George W. Bush administration than perhaps believed that a decade or 2 decades earlier. The Obama administration, to its credit, is trying to repair America's reputation in the world. But policymakers in both parties have to understand that when the U.S. has a highly intrusive policy, populations resent that, even when they might otherwise be favorably inclined to basic American values. We damage our influence in the world by having a heavy-handed and insensitive foreign policy.